Imagine this. It's the year 1066. William the Conqueror stands on the cliffs of Normandy, but instead of wooden ships and iron swords, he possesses a weapon that could turn London to ash in seconds. A single decision could erase entire kingdoms from existence. What if the most volatile, power-hungry rulers in human history had access to humanity's most destructive force? This isn't just a thought experiment. This is a journey into the darkest corners of medieval ambition, where absolute power meets absolute destruction. Today, we're exploring what would have happened if medieval kings had nuclear weapons. The answer might be more terrifying than you think. To understand this nightmare scenario, we need to step into the medieval mind. Picture Europe in the year 1000. Kings weren't just rulers. They were believed to be chosen by God Himself. They held the divine right to command, to conquer, and to kill. Their word was literally law, and their ambitions knew no earthly bounds. Take Charlemagne, who carved out an empire stretching from Spain to Eastern Europe through pure military might. Or consider the ruthless efficiency of the Norman conquest, where William the Conqueror's victory at Hastings changed the course of English history forever. These weren't men who believed in restraint or diplomatic solutions. Medieval warfare was already brutal, beyond modern comprehension. The siege of Jerusalem during the First Crusade saw crusaders wading through blood that reached their ankles. The Mongol conquests under Genghis Khan resulted in the deaths of an estimated 40 million people using nothing but horses, oars, and swords. Now imagine placing the power of nuclear fission into hands that thought nothing of ordering the massacre of entire cities. Medieval kings operated under a completely different moral framework than modern leaders. They didn't worry about public opinion, international law, or economic consequences. They worried about God's favor and their place in history. The concept of mutually assured destruction, which kept nuclear powers in check during the Cold War, simply wouldn't have existed in medieval minds. These were rulers who regularly staked their entire kingdoms on single battles, who saw warfare as glorious, and who believed that might truly did make right. Let's create our first scenario. The year is 1095, and somehow, miraculously, Pope Urban II doesn't just call for a crusade to retake Jerusalem. Instead, he reveals that Christian scholars have unlocked the secrets of splitting the atom. The first nuclear weapon is gifted to the most faithful Christian king, Louis VI of France. Louis, known historically as Louis the Fat, was actually a capable military commander, despite his unflattering nickname. In our alternate timeline, he becomes something far more terrifying: the world's first nuclear monarch. The psychological impact would have been immediate and catastrophic. Medieval people already believed in divine intervention, miracles, and the supernatural. Imagine their terror when Louis demonstrates his new weapon on a small enemy castle. The blinding flash, the mushroom cloud rising into the sky, the complete obliteration of stone walls that had stood for centuries. Word would spread like wildfire across Europe, not through newspapers or television, but through the primitive communication networks of the time. Merchants, pilgrims, and terrified refugees carrying tales that would sound like the apocalypse itself. Other kingdoms would have reacted with a mixture of disbelief, terror, and desperate ambition. The Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV would demand his own nuclear weapons, claiming his imperial title gave him precedence over a mere French king. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I would send frantic messages to Constantinople, begging his scholars to unlock these same terrible secrets. But here's where it gets truly frightening. Medieval kings had no concept of nuclear fallout, radiation sickness, or long-term environmental damage. Louis might have used his weapon repeatedly, not understanding that he was poisoning the very lands he sought to conquer. The Crusades, which historically cost hundreds of thousands of lives over 2 centuries, might have ended in mere weeks. Jerusalem, Damascus, Cairo, all reduced to radioactive ruins. The Christian dream of retaking the Holy Land would have been achieved at the cost of making it uninhabitable for generations. Once one medieval king possessed nuclear weapons, the race would have been on. And unlike the carefully managed nuclear proliferation of the modern world, medieval arms development would have been chaotic, secretive, and incredibly dangerous. Picture the court of Richard the Lionheart in the 1190s. Richard was already obsessed with military technology. He was one of the first European kings to make extensive use of crossbows and siege engines. In our scenario, he would have poured England's entire treasury into developing nuclear weapons to match the French capability. Medieval alchemy was already a mysterious blend of primitive science and magical thinking. Nuclear research in this era would have been conducted by court wizards and scholarly monks who understood neither radiation safety nor proper laboratory procedures. The accidents alone would have been catastrophic. Imagine a nuclear accident in medieval London. No evacuation procedures, no radiation detectors, no medical understanding of radiation sickness. Thousands would have died horrible deaths, their suffering attributed to divine punishment or demonic influence. The political ramifications would have been equally devastating. The delicate balance of medieval feudalism depended on personal relationships between lords and vassals. Nuclear weapons would have shattered this system overnight. Why honor your feudal obligations to a duke when the king could vaporize his castle with a single command? Consider the impact on the Third Crusade. Historically, Richard the Lionheart, Philip Augustus of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire struggled to work together despite their shared Christian mission. Add nuclear weapons to this mix, and their alliance would have been impossible. Richard, with his famous temper and military aggression, might have threatened to use nuclear weapons against his own Christian allies if they didn't follow his battle plans. The crusade could have ended with European powers nuking each other in the desert outside Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Saladin, the brilliant Muslim leader who recaptured Jerusalem from the Crusaders, would have faced an impossible situation. How do you conduct honorable warfare against an enemy who can erase your entire army without even engaging in battle? But perhaps the most terrifying scenario involves the Mongols acquiring nuclear weapons. Genghis Khan and his successors created the largest contiguous land empire in human history through superior military tactics, psychological warfare, and an absolutely ruthless approach to conquest. The Mongols already had a policy of complete destruction for cities that resisted them. When they conquered Kiev in 1240, they left it so devastated that 6 years later, a traveler reported seeing only 200 houses in a city that once held 50,000 people. This was achieved with arrows, swords, and siege engines. Now imagine Genghis Khan with nuclear weapons. The Mongol military machine was built for rapid conquest and psychological terror. They would send messages to cities demanding immediate surrender, promising complete annihilation to anyone who resisted. With nuclear weapons, these wouldn't be empty threats. The Mongol conquest of China, which historically took decades and cost millions of lives, might have been completed in months. Beijing, then called Zhongdu, could have been destroyed with a single nuclear strike as an example to other Chinese cities. Even more terrifying is what this would have meant for Europe. When the Mongols invaded Eastern Europe in the 1240s, they defeated every army sent against them. Polish knights, Hungarian cavalry, Russian princes, all fell before Mongol military superiority. In our nuclear timeline, the Battle of Mohi in 1241, where the Mongols crushed the Hungarian army, wouldn't have been a battle at all. It would have been a nuclear demonstration. The psychological impact on European morale would have been total and immediate. Medieval Europe's decentralized feudal system, which historically allowed it to eventually resist Mongol expansion, would have been useless against nuclear weapons. You can't conduct guerrilla warfare against an enemy who can irradiate entire regions. The Mongols might have continued their conquest all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Paris, London, Rome, all could have fallen to Mongol nuclear strikes. The entire course of Western civilization would have been altered beyond recognition. The Islamic world of the medieval period was far more scientifically advanced than Christian Europe in many ways. Islamic scholars preserved and expanded upon Greek and Roman knowledge, while Europe struggled through the Dark Ages. Cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo were centers of learning that rivaled anything in the Christian world. If nuclear weapons had appeared in medieval times, Islamic rulers might have been the first to develop them, not Christian kings. Consider Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid Caliph who ruled from 786 to 809 during the height of the Islamic Golden Age. His court in Baghdad was home to the House of Wisdom, where scholars translated and expanded upon works from across the known world. In our alternate timeline, these same scholars might have unlocked atomic secrets centuries before their European counterparts. The political structure of the Islamic world would have made nuclear weapons even more dangerous. Unlike the relatively decentralized feudalism of medieval Europe, Islamic empires often had stronger central authority. A caliph with nuclear weapons could have unified the entire Islamic world under a single banner through sheer terror. The Reconquista in Spain, which historically took Christian kingdoms over 700 years to complete, might never have happened at all. A nuclear-armed Cordoba Caliphate could have not only held on to Islamic Spain, but potentially reconquered all of Europe for Islam. The Crusades would have taken on an entirely different character. Instead of Christian knights struggling to retake the Holy Land, we might have seen Islamic nuclear strikes against Rome itself. The papal seat of Christianity could have been reduced to radioactive ruins, fundamentally altering the development of Western religion and culture. Perhaps most significantly, the Mongol invasions that devastated the Islamic world in the 13th century might have been stopped cold. When the Mongols sacked Baghdad in 1258, they destroyed the House of Wisdom and threw its books into the Tigris River. This single act is considered one of the greatest losses to human knowledge in history. In our nuclear timeline, the Mongol siege of Baghdad might have ended very differently. A nuclear-armed caliph could have turned the Mongol army to ash before they ever reached the city walls. By the late medieval period, if nuclear weapons had been available, Europe might have been completely uninhabitable. The combination of medieval ambition, religious fervor, and nuclear capability would have created a perfect storm of destruction. Consider the 100 Years' War between England and France, which lasted from 1337 to 1453. This conflict, fought with conventional medieval weapons, already devastated large portions of France and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. With nuclear weapons, It might have lasted only a few years, but left both kingdoms as radioactive wastelands. The Black Death, which killed 1/3 of Europe's population in the 14th century, might have seemed like a minor inconvenience compared to the effects of medieval nuclear warfare. Radiation poisoning, nuclear winter effects, and the complete breakdown of agricultural systems could have reduced Europe's population to a tiny fraction of its pre-nuclear levels. The Renaissance might never have happened at all. The intellectual and cultural flowering that began in Italy in the 14th century depended on accumulated wealth, stable political systems, and preserved classical knowledge. Nuclear warfare would have destroyed all of these prerequisites. Art, literature, and scientific advancement would have ground to a halt as surviving populations focused purely on survival in a radioactive wasteland. The great cathedrals of medieval Europe, which took generations to build, would have been reduced to rubble in seconds. Even more tragically, the survivors wouldn't have understood why their world was dying around them. Medieval people had no concept of radiation or its long-term effects. They would have attributed the sickness, birth defects, and environmental destruction to God's wrath, leading to even more religious extremism and potentially more nuclear conflicts. But perhaps there's another way this story could have unfolded. What if medieval nuclear weapons had actually led to an earlier form of international peace? The concept of mutually assured destruction, which prevented nuclear war during the Cold War, might have emerged even earlier in medieval times. After the first few nuclear exchanges devastated several kingdoms, surviving rulers might have realized that nuclear warfare was literally a dead end. Medieval kings, despite their reputation for violence, were often quite pragmatic. They understood that a kingdom of ash and radiation couldn't provide them with the wealth, soldiers, and prestige they craved. A nuclear stalemate might have emerged much sooner than the 20th century version. This could have led to the development of international law and diplomacy centuries earlier than it actually occurred. The Peace of Westphalia, which established the modern concept of national sovereignty in 1648, might have had a medieval predecessor designed to prevent nuclear annihilation. Religious leaders, who held enormous influence over medieval rulers, might have declared nuclear weapons contrary to God's will. The Catholic Church's later opposition to nuclear proliferation shows that religious institutions can play a role in arms control. Medieval popes might have excommunicated any ruler who used nuclear weapons. The end result might have been a more peaceful medieval period, with conflicts resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. The human cost of learning this lesson, however, would have been astronomical. As we emerge from this dark, alternate timeline, one thing becomes clear. We should be grateful that medieval kings never had nuclear weapons. The combination of absolute power, religious conviction, and technological capability would have been devastating beyond imagination. The medieval period was already marked by incredible violence, religious warfare, and political instability. Adding nuclear weapons to this volatile mix would likely have ended human civilization centuries before it had a chance to mature into something resembling modern international order. Perhaps this thought experiment serves as a reminder of how far we've come. Modern nuclear powers, for all their flaws, operate within systems of law, public accountability, and mutual deterrence that simply didn't exist in medieval times. The fact that we've managed to avoid nuclear warfare for nearly 80 years is a testament to human progress, not luck. But it also serves as a warning. Nuclear weapons remain the ultimate test of human wisdom and restraint. If we've learned anything from imagining medieval nuclear warfare, it's that the power to destroy civilization should never be taken lightly. no matter how advanced we think we've become. The next time you see a medieval castle or read about knights and crusades, remember, we came terrifyingly close to never having a renaissance, never developing modern science, never creating the art and culture that defines our humanity today. Sometimes, the most important inventions are the ones that come at exactly the right time in human history. What do you think would have happened if medieval kings had possessed the ultimate weapon? The answer might determine whether we're wise enough to handle such power ourselves.